Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have Tanner Jones with Consultwebs and Matt Smyers, who is the make sure I'm right on this, Senior Digital Advertising Advisor with Consultwebs. And today we want to talk about something that I've seen over the last 4, 5, 6 months, causing a lot of law firms a lot of headaches and a lot of troubles, and it's local service ads. When it started, I guess it was a couple of years ago, I guess coming on 3 years now, this August or September. We were very fortunate at Pilma. We got all our members involved in it because I like to be first. And we got them verified and got a company to get them verified. And our members killed it for like the first 90, 120 days. And then everybody else caught up. And I've seen it kind of like a roller coaster, up and down. I see some firms doing very well with it. I see some firms doing terrible with it. And I know there's a lot of different things. I know they come out with something new in the last 3 or 4 months that has changed. For some firms that were doing good, they've dropped off. So I really want to try to get down to the bottom of it and really talk today about what the best practices are in trying to get this LSA, or local service ads as people call them, get a hold on it. So thank you guys for being here and willing to share.
Absolutely, Ken.
Glad to be here.
Yep, Ken, it's an honor.
So like I said, it's the whole digital landscape. I mean, remember PPC, it got so crazy, people were bidding $200, $300, $400 a word for keywords. And I felt like local service ads were kind of going to take over because, their calls are not just, ads. Can you guys elaborate on some of the challenges law firms are facing in today's digital landscape? I mean, it's just so much more competitive. And I'm seeing people saying, I just don't think it's working anymore. I've had some members of my mastermind say, I don't even know if I'm going to do SEO anymore. By the time you get down to the first one on the organic, you're like number 15, is it really worth it? So can y'all elaborate on all that?
Yeah, and I think it starts with the Google landscape, right, Ken? I mean, what we do know is that Google remains top dog, right? And your presence on Google across the multiple ways you can have a presence on Google remains paramount. So, that landscape in particular just becomes more increasingly competitive, with firms vying for position on the page between organic results, local maps, PPC, and now, LSA. One thing I think it's important for firms to keep in mind regarding that landscape is what hasn't changed over the last few years since LSA has been part of this landscape is that LSAs are the only way to get absolute top position on the Google search page. The LSA ads are always at the top of the page, whether it's on desktop or whether it's on mobile, right? So that is part of the landscape. So when we're talking about LSA in the context of the big picture and challenges that firms face, I think it's very important to keep that in mind, that, if we all acknowledge that getting position on Google remains, critical, let's not forget that the LSA ads are the only way to get that absolute, top position, which is very important when it comes to getting those clicks, getting those leads.
Yeah, one thing too, I'll mention, Ken, just kind of following right along with what Matt's suggesting. One thing is certain, Google has, as Matt suggested, they've been the top dog. They've been the dominant search player. And so we're playing by Google's rules, right? This is Google's world. We're just trying to take advantage of the traffic and the viable leads that they are generating. So they own that, they control that. So to a big degree, we're all frustrated with how Google continues to evolve. But one thing is certain, in that we've seen, if you rewind 10 years ago, right, before local services ads, we were seeing the local maps results as being just fire. I mean, it would generate business consistently and still does to a large degree, but Google obviously follows the data. They notice where users were navigating and clicking because people like to do business locally with people that they know and they trust. And so Google really caught on to that, and that's where local services ads came into play. And so I believe personally that the local success that we saw as marketers, that law firms noticed in having a Google business listing set up for their office, Google found a way to monetize that concept. And what we're seeing today, going into Q2 of 2024, we're seeing more and more often Google is actually pulling local results out of the search landscape entirely, or dropping those local results down even lower, putting even more emphasis, I believe, on local services ads. So I want to stress that, because that is a challenge for law firms, but with challenges come significant opportunity.
Yeah. So what can law firms do if they're having a problem? I hear, like I said, I hear some of my masterminds saying, it's like crickets. I mean, 3 months ago, I was getting 20 leads a month, 30 leads a month, 50 leads a month. And now I'm lucky if I get 5 or 10 or 3 or 4. What kind of steps, actionable steps, can they take?
Yeah, and we hear that as well, right? I think one thing to expect going forward is the inconsistency, and I know how frustrating that is for firms. I think in order to understand the steps to take in order to optimize the campaign, we need to understand what are the ranking factors, the top ranking factors that Google is looking at. Of course, they don't share this with us directly, right? But what's important to Google when it comes to the LSAs? And I would put those ranking factors into 4 broad categories. The first is proximity, right? As Tanner mentioned, this is meant to be a local result. Google is trying to put their users in touch with a local service provider. So the proximity of the person conducting the search to your physical office address is going to be a factor in whether Google shows your ad higher up or lower down on the list. Number 2 is reviews. We know the importance of Google reviews for your Google presence generally, not just with LSA, but it's a major factor in the LSAs. And we're not just talking about the volume of the reviews and the quality of those reviews, which are very important, of course, but I think it's the consistency of those reviews. Are you showing consistent activity where you're getting a handful of reviews each month on a consistent basis? Those are important when it comes to Google ranking your ad. The broad category of responsiveness, and I'm going to touch on this in a little more detail, I think, later on, but generally, Google wants to make sure that you're answering the phone. Right. They want to make sure, again, they're putting their neck on the line saying this is a trusted service provider, right, that can help you with your needs, with your legal needs. They want to make sure if they're bouncing phone calls to you that you're actually answering the phone. And then finally, obviously Google is in this to make money. Your bid and your budget become very important, ranking factors, for your ads. Are you competitive in what you're willing to pay per lead or what your budget might be per month? So those are kind of the 4 broad categories I would look to. And then to dive in a little bit more detail, some practical takeaways, I think, from each of those, I would focus most heavily on the reviews, right? Let's make sure you're getting a very consistent, and we've all seen, firms rank very well in LSA that don't have as many reviews. They have a 4.9 or 5.0 rating. You can compete without thousands of reviews. You just need to have a consistent presence there. So that's one practical step.
So let me ask you about that, and tell me if I'm wrong. But and maybe this is just rumors or fake news or whatever. But I heard that they it's not the number of reviews, but that if you've got like a 4.8, 4.9, a 5.0 and have no really like ones that a 1 can kill you. But I don't know. Is that true or not true? Or we don't know.
I don't know that we know that in that level of detail, but what I would say is the overall rating is important, right? I mean, if you have enough 5s, if you have 100 5s and you have one, that's not going to kill your overall rating.
And then something you said, keep it local. But what I've seen, and maybe you can explain it, I've seen some law firms that go statewide and they're killing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is possible, right? Multiple locations in a state certainly helps in that regard. But we've had success with campaigns targeted statewide. We've had success with campaigns that are targeted more local. That's one of those where it can be trial and error. There's no downside to targeting side when it comes to the leads, to the extent that the firm's willing to travel to take a case anywhere in the state. I would say try statewide and see what happens. Worst case scenario, they don't show your ad halfway across the state. You haven't lost anything in that regard, right? So I'd say cover as much territory as you can.
And then the other thing, one thing I've really heard, and I think people that are listening or watching this need to pay very strict attention to, is consistent reviews. And I've seen over the years, a lot of law firms and they'll have contests, and then all of a sudden they'll get like 100. They'll be sitting there getting 1 or 2 a week, and all of a sudden they say, well, my competitor over here, he's at 450. I've got to get I'm at 400. I want to get ahead of him. So I want, all right, guys, if we can get 100 reviews this month, everybody gets a $500 bonus, and it happens. So does that hurt you?
Does it hurt you in what regard?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, like, does Google say, okay, you're not getting them consistently? All of a sudden we've seen a big jump, like 100
I
extra.
see.
See what
Yeah,
I'm saying? It's
I
not
do.
consistent.
I think that can be dangerous.
Yeah.
I think spreading them out over time is more effective. And I think anything that's going to set up a potential red flag for Google, and that could be one of them, where you have months of inactivity and suddenly you get 100 reviews, I think could be very dangerous. So I think if you're able to secure those reviews consistently, you're going to be much better off.
Yeah, I've even heard. Yeah, we
Wait.
even had some members that are masterminds that said that when they got a load at one time, like 25% of them just disappeared. Google just deleted them.
Yeah, we've heard that as well.
With no reason. And, trying to get up with Google is like trying to get up with the president. I mean, it's just impossible.
Most often, Ken, real quick, those reviews are likely coming from someone who either just set up a Gmail account, and so they're being flagged because they're infant accounts, or they've never left a review before. And when you see an influx of reviews coming through, naturally there are red flags. On the other side of that coin, though, just looking at it purely from a natural, organic standpoint, Google wants to see that these businesses are open, they're active, and they're consistently helping locals in the area. And so when that tells the story and the narrative that that's exactly what you're doing day in and day out, that's an actual benefit to your listing, whether it's through your local listing or your local services ads.
I was just going to say, I touched on those 4 ranking factors. I would put a lot of emphasis on the responsiveness ranking factor, and a couple of key takeaways for your listeners there. I mentioned earlier, make sure you're answering the phone. And the easy way to check to make sure that's happening is to go into the dashboard and look at the calls and make sure you're not missing phone calls. If you're missing phone calls, you have one of 2 options. You can either adjust your business hours, right, to make sure that your business hours are set to when somebody can actually answer the phone, or you need to bring in help and outsource to have somebody else fielding those calls for you. Missed calls can be deadly to the performance of an LSA campaign. And then also under that responsiveness topic, there's a function called message leads within the LSA platform. And that allows the user to send you messages directly, either by email or by text. And to the extent possible, I would suggest all firms do whatever they can to enable that function. Sometimes in an LSA ad, you'll see an additional line of text that says something like, typically replies within 1 hour. If you can get to that point, that's a major factor in getting your ad ranked. And if you're able to set up, even if you have to set up a dummy cell phone line that one person has with them all the time and they have the app installed, and you're texting immediately with those leads, I think that's going to help you move up the rankings very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we've had people where they flip it over to their call center, and their call center misses it, and then they get put, I call it the dungeon. You get put at the bottom, you have to work your way back up, which is very, very hard. So I don't know what y'all think the best practice is. I've told my people, just do it when you got your people there to answer the phone, because, I mean, to me, I'm not going to trust, this is so important. I don't want to trust this with a third party, because to be honest with you, the best call center in the world are terrible. What I'm seeing right now. And, I know there's some good ones, but they're none of them perfect. They're going to screw it up. People don't come in. People, you know how it works. I mean, it's anytime you got human element in it, there's mistakes made, right? I don't know. That's kind of, I mean, if I had my people if I had somebody come in at like 5 and work to like 9 or 10 just to do that, I would do that. But otherwise, I just stay in my business hours. I don't know what y'all think about that, but that's kind of where
And the business hours is another point I wanted to bring it up. And we've experimented with that multiple ways with our clients. I think the gut reaction is, let's set it to 24/7. And if we can have coverage, then let's do that. I mean, for most of our clients, our research shows that most of the calls that amount to anything are coming in during business hours. If you can consolidate, we've tried this, we've switched firms over from 24/7 down to regular business hours. One, to help with responsiveness, make sure somebody's answering the phone. But also what I think that does is it sends a message to Google that you want to consolidate the budget you have available into a smaller amount of time, which really kind of puts a little pressure on the algorithm for them to say, okay, we need to send these leads to this firm during these hours. And historically, that's when the best calls and leads come through. I'm not discouraging anyone from going 24/7, but one thing you may want to consider, depending on your staff's availability, is limiting those hours to standard business hours, 8 to 5, 9 to 5:30, whatever it is.
I want
And
to point something out real quick too on the factor of considering whether you're outsourcing intake or bringing it in-house, because from my experience, Ken, there's no perfect scenario or solution there. It's the whole concept of good management, good leadership allows for trusting but verifying. And from my experience, even on the in-house side, it gives this facade of 100% control over it. And in many instances, you absolutely have more control. But from my experience, humans are humans, and you're going to have individuals there that will immediately start screaming, LSAs are junk. We're being inundated with low quality leads. We need to turn it off immediately. That's not the managing partner or the owner saying that most often. It's the person having to field these calls. And so I want to caution that concept that you can't outsource this or that in-house is the best, because at the end of the day, it's a matter of being able to monitor, just as Matt said, how many missed calls are happening, whether it's in-house or externally, and then being able to monitor specifically what the conversion rate is, so you know how many cases are being acquired. Because again, I see it all too often where intake will dictate that this is a bad platform, for example, to advertise, but maybe in most instances, it's because either they're overwhelmed already with leads, or maybe they've had a series of low quality leads and that is their reality. So again, more so just a cautionary tale that I've seen, but something definitely to be cognizant of in tracking that conversion data.
Now, I want to go back to the reviews, because a couple of things, to get on the 3-pack, you got to have reviews and you got to be posting stuff on your Google business page, right? Am I right on that?
That's a big part of it.
I'll make sure I'm right.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get these reviews, is it a good practice, or does it have any effect on LSAs? I guess what I'm saying, to respond to those reviews, good and bad. I mean, and of course the bad ones, I got to be careful how you do that because of ethics and violating confidences and stuff. But do you see that when you respond to them and thank you, like I thank you for, that client service is our number one goal, whatever, does that help or not really?
I think specific to LSA, there's not enough supporter data to say that it's a major factor. I would say it certainly can't hurt, right?
Yeah.
Because they're looking at all of these signals across your entire Google platform, right? And we know that the reviews that are posted on the Google business, profile carry over into the LSAs. And if they're looking at that as a signal, right, as a positive signal that this is a firm, as Tanner mentioned earlier, that is actively working with, with people in the market, it certainly can't hurt. So I would suggest, to the extent a firm can do that, that would be a solid plan.
Yeah, I've even heard, so you said something about an app, download the app. So have you got to have it? I mean, can you talk about the app and what it's for and why you should use it or not use it?
Yeah, I mean, the app is just going to give you, as the owner of the account, the ability to interact with leads directly from your mobile device. And it's very similar to what you'll see on the desktop dashboard. Its functionality varies a little bit from the desktop, but if you have the app and you've enabled that message leads function and you're carrying that around with you, and somebody chooses to use the message, via text, that's going to pop up as a notification on your mobile device, and you'll have the ability directly from your mobile device to respond to that. And that's going to help with that responsiveness ranking factor that we talked about, and hopefully get you to where they're showing that text that says typically responds within an hour.
So this is where I'm a little fuzzy. There's two areas that I'm kind of fuzzy on. Is there something about once you talk to the person, is making some kind of notation in the app or on the LSA page or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that?
Of course. Yeah. So that's always a good idea. We encourage our clients to do that. So if you're in the LSA dashboard and you click on an individual lead, it opens up what is essentially a note card on that phone call. You've got the caller's phone number, which Google captures. Then you have, spaces to fill in additional information, their name, their email address. And then there's just a catch-all that says notes. And so we encourage our clients, when they're listening to a call, even if it's somebody they can't help, go to that note section and put some text in there specific to the types of cases you're looking for. So let's just say that, we're targeting motor vehicle accidents and the caller calls and there's no injuries. It's an accident with no injury. They're looking for property damage help, right? You might want to put some notes in there that says, caller had a motor vehicle accident, but no injuries, something to that extent. And what you're doing is you're basically stuffing those notes with keywords. And you're showing that, again, it's that interaction, that activity on those individual calls. And we found that to be very helpful. And it doesn't have to be paragraphs of text, a few sentences is just fine. That also helps you when you're looking back over your leads over the course of a month. If you see a consistent pattern there in those calls, you may start making some adjustments, for example, to the job types that you're targeting to try to cut out some of the undesirable leads for your firm and the types of cases you're looking to get.
Yeah, and don't you have to like click something like there's a couple words, and I can't remember what they are, to be honest with you. Like a box you click, but I
think I know where you're going, right? So the ability to move the lead in the dashboard to a different stage.
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, of course. Right. So they have different terms for it, right? You've got booked is one of the
that was it. Yeah, booked.
Yeah, again, to Tanner's point, that's showing that you're nurturing that contact, that lead. So, I encourage firms to go through and Google doesn't provide very specific definitions of what is booked, right? Keep in mind, this platform was originally built for other local service providers like heating and air conditioning companies, electricians, et cetera, right? Where booked is pretty obvious. You book them, you're going to go to the house and service that client. It's a little unclear and ambiguous when it comes to the legal practice. So as long as you have a consistent methodology within your firm to say, if we're moving a lead from this category to that category, we're consistent about it, that shows that consistent movement and activity, for that particular lead, which sends, again, strong signals to Google and is going to help with ranking.
Yeah. And then the final thing you talked about was bid and budget. And that is, I am completely lost there because I've seen some people say, I just put it automatic, bam. And then I got some people that say, oh, I look at it 3 or 4 times a day. And I can't, what should you do? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, this is where, with us at Consultwebs having hundreds of these accounts, our experience comes into play there. There is no absolute right answer as to which bidding method you're going to choose, how much you're going to set. We've seen results, positive results both ways. And for us, it's a lot of trial and error for a particular account in each different market. And that's where our team is checking in several times a week on each campaign to see where are we with our bid, what is the max potential bid if we're going on a cost per lead basis, and making sure that we're always at that max. We're making slight adjustments to continually increase the budgets over time. You have to be careful, kind of like with the reviews, of extreme movements there that can send red flags to Google. So you do have to be methodical and intentional about how you're setting those budgets. But
Yeah,
there's
I've seen that. We had one of our members went from like 5,000 a month to like 100,000 a month, and it kind of killed him.
Yeah, it can happen.
And I think the deal was that somehow he found out it takes about 30 days for them to get reacclimated with you. If you do something crazy like that,
And that's a great point. That's a good warning for the listeners. Changes to the LSA platform based on changes that you make are painfully slow. Google has admitted when you make a significant change, it can take up to 2 weeks for that change to actually be effective and start to see results. And that's where it's frustrating to manage these accounts because, we're looking to get immediate results, right? And so are our clients. But you make a significant change and it just moves at a glacial pace sometimes before the algorithm catches up and actually puts that change into play. And then you need to give it some time to, essentially to breathe and see how, what kind of an impact the changes are having on the account.
Yeah. So, AI is everywhere else. Do you think AI, what do you see the future of LSAs? Do you think AI is going to get involved in the LSAs? What do you foresee?
Well, I think in some ways, and Google hasn't announced this formally to my knowledge, I think it's already had an impact. So you may have noticed relatively recently, if you're disputing leads, you may have noticed that the response time on disputes has gotten much faster. And one thing that's been frustrating for the legal profession, in particular with disputing leads, as you know, they give you a limited number of reasons to dispute, right? And that was all based on the campaign settings. Like if somebody's outside of your geographic area, when they conduct the search and they turn into a lead, Google knows that. And if you say outside of my area and they have the IP address and they know where that search came from, it's easy for them automatically to say, okay, you're right, we accept your dispute. But what's been frustrating is there's nuance here with the legal profession that doesn't get considered in those, black and white disputable categories. So I mentioned earlier the motor vehicle accident situation, right? That person was probably searched car accident lawyer. They very well may be within your geographic targeting, right? And so Google is saying, just, from first look, hey, this is a valid lead. If you try to dispute it because it's an accident with no injury, they don't understand that nuance, right? So they would decline that dispute, and then law firms it would be on the phone with Google trying to dispute a lead and bring some subjective common sense, human element to this, and it was very frustrating. So my point to that is, I think what's now happened is they have pointed their AI at the phone call scripts, and the AI is making those decisions. And if you're putting, and they have access to the transcript, obviously, right? And if they're hearing your folks interacting with the caller and saying, I'm sorry, but because you don't have an injury, this isn't really something we would do. The AI is picking up on that. And if you're disputing that lead, they're accepting those, now more often than they used to, and it happens much faster. So I think that's one example of where the AI has already started to have an impact on LSAs.
Yeah. So something you said was that, I guess what I'm thinking here is, I lost my train of thought. Well, let me ask you this: the local service ads. Do you think that? I guess what I'm saying is, do you think that eventually maps are going to be paid for, or is LSA in essence maps paid maps? I mean,
it's a great point, and I think that ties in with what Tanner mentioned earlier, right? If we're seeing maps continually moving, down the page, and LSA is really meant to be a local result, right? We've all been frustrated with results and saying, I know this firm doesn't actually have an office here, but there they are, right? I get that. But I still think that's their goal, is to have LSA be that local result. Now, even within maps, you have a paid position. There is a PPC opportunity at the top of maps in the expanded list. So I think it all remains important, right? We talked about the whole landscape between organic results, maps, PPC, LSA. And as you can see, they're constantly exploring and experimenting with different positioning on the page, right? You'll never see the same structure of results twice, other than LSAs being at the very top, right? But sometimes you'll see PPC first, and then organic, and then maps, and then another set of PPC ads, right? And they're constantly experimenting with that. And obviously, they're looking at how to maximize their revenue. And that comes with their overall goal of providing the user with the most relevant search result based on their search, because that's what keeps people coming back to Google and using it as a tool.
I've had some of our members in masterminds, they refuse to contest any call because they're afraid if they do, they'll cut them back because they're bitching. I mean, have you seen anything to verify? I mean, is that true or not true?
Absolutely right. So much earlier on, when what to dispute, whether to dispute was up in question, we were seeing accounts, and Google will never admit this to us, but we were seeing accounts where their performance seemed to be negatively impacted by disputing. And
because they want the money. They want the money. If you dispute it, they lose that money.
And so, there are times where we will encourage firms, especially if we're just trying to get early on, a new account, we're trying to get at some volume. We'll encourage them to not dispute for a period of time. And you really have to look at that as cost of doing business in the platform. If you think about pay-per-click, if you're willing to invest in pay-per-click, you know that a large majority of those actual clicks are not going to result in an actual lead or a case. And as you mentioned earlier, Ken, you're paying a premium for those clicks. You're not getting that $150 back just because it was a law student, looking for an internship who clicked on the ad.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at it that way, it's the cost of doing business. But in terms of its impact, the impact of disputes on the campaign, I think because they've now integrated the AI and made it easier for the AI to understand some of the nuance there, I don't think they're penalizing for disputing quite as much as they once were. I would still say proceed with caution there. If you're disputing 70% of your of the leads, Google's eventually going to say, okay, I don't know what else this firm wants. We're just going to stop sending them the leads. Yeah.
So we're wrapping this up now. I think we've covered, but what have I not asked you that I should ask you?
Well, I think the big picture question is, because you started off by saying the frustration that a lot of firms are seeing right now. I think the big picture is LSA right for every law firm? Should you still be investing in it? And the short answer to that question is yes, and for two big reasons. Number one, I already touched on. It is the only way to get absolute top of page position. It's always at the top. And if you think there's value in that, then you have to stay in the platform. Number two is, be patient. You're going to see ups and downs. As more firms enter the market, as they continue to change the algorithm, as they continue to change the platform, you're going to experience that. But because it's on a cost per lead basis, if you're not getting leads, sure, that's missed opportunity, but it's not like you're spending money. And so because of that, and there's brand value in these ads, being at the top of the page, whether they click on that result or not, there's tremendous brand value in that. So I would say, given the relatively low risk proposition, because you're only paying for leads, because of that brand value and because it's absolutely at the top of the page, if a firm comes and says, should I even be investing in this? The short answer is yes. I think firms need to stay in it because it can produce results that some of the other platforms can't.
Well, I know you guys know your stuff. I sold my law firm about 14 years ago, but I hired the original founder. I think he's kind of semi-retired now, Dale Titchener. But I think it was in 2003, if I remember correctly. And my old law firm is still using you guys. So I've never seen a law firm in my life stay with one SEO company that long. They usually get frustrated sometimes or something because, like you say, I've always said that internet digital marketing is like trying to paint, and I heard Tanner say this or somebody one time, like trying to paint a damn moving train. Mm-hmm. It's just hard to stay on top of it. I mean, because they change and everything's secretive. And then when something does come out, people start conspiracy theories, I guess, whatever you want to say. Everybody's got their own angle of what's going on. And it takes 2 or 3 months for it to shake out and really figure it out, And a lot of times lawyers are not patient enough to deal with that. And I understand it's money, right? It's money. But anyway, so if somebody wants to get up with you guys, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, so it's as simple as going to consultwebs.com. You can find us there, reach out to us by phone or by email. We're more than happy to offer a consultation as well if we want to sit down and talk through your local services ads or any other digital marketing strategy. We'd be very honored to be able to do that, especially if you hear us through this podcast, make sure you mention Ken's name.
There you go. And listen, looking forward to seeing, I don't know if you're going to be there, Matt, but I know Tanner's speaking at our summit. If you haven't registered, you need to do so. This is going to be a killer event. We're going to sell out. We're about 40% ahead of where we were last year at this time. So I feel like we're going to have a sellout. It's just go to pilma.org, go to events, and register. I mean, you got nothing to lose. If you go there, you don't like it, I'll give you your money back plus up to $1,000 of documented travel and hotel expenses. And we got good room block rates at the Roosevelt there in New Orleans. So it's a nice hotel, not near downtown, where all the action's at. So anyway, thank you guys so much. I think this was very enlightening. You got me straight down on a couple of things because, as you could tell at the end, I was a little fuzzy on the bidding. I was a little fuzzy on using the app. The other stuff, we've talked about it over the last 12 months ad nauseum, but I've never really heard what's the best practices. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Glad to do it. Thanks for having us.
Yes, sir. Until next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.